Kaur, and I'm a knitting enthusiast, which means I really, really like knitting. But before I start my talk, I want to start off with a couple of questions. What I have for you here is a sweater. It's just an ordinary black one, and it'll serve its purpose well. Very practical. And now for sweater number 2. How many of you think this sweater is much more interesting? It certainly has a lot more colors. Now that we have them side by side, which sweater do you think would be more interesting to knit and to wear? If you're going to pick that one, I agree with you. I'm someone who likes to put a lot of color into my knitting, whether it's bobbles or cables, or most often color. Which brings me to my topic, intarsia. For this talk, I'm going to define intarsia, tell you a couple of knitting tools you need to get started, give you some basic knitting terms, tell you how to follow a chart, and show you a couple of intarsia projects I've done. Intarsia can be any knitting with blocks of color. That means that stripes, checkers, and flowers are all examples of intarsia. It can be as easy as basic stripes, or it can be as complicated as a repeating motif. Now that we know what intarsia is, let's go on to some basic tools. Well, all knitters need knitting needles. Some knitters use bobbins to keep their yarn organized, because if you're using 6 to 8 yarns in every row, your yarn could definitely get tangled. But what some people do, if they don't want to invest in bobbins, is to wrap their yarns around these clothespins. I don't use either, though. All I do is make a small ball of yarn, and then that sort of keeps my yarn organized. And yarn needles are very helpful for weaving extra float ends and to help with mistakes. Now that we've talked about some tools for trade, let's go on to some basic knitting terms. Our MC, or main color, is our background color, and the 2 most basic stitches you're going to be using are knit and purl. Your second color is the color you knit the design with, but most likely you'll be using more than one of these. They'll probably be labeled in your pattern as color A, color B, color C, and so on. A YU, or a yarn under, is used when you're changing colors, and a YO, or a yarn over, is used for attaching motif frames. A motif is just a square rectangle of fabric with an intarsia pattern inside. Now that I've taught you actually a couple of pattern terms, let's go on to actually knit a chart. In this pattern, which I've blown up, is white is our background color, or main color, and then our second colors are orange, yellow, brown, and green, which means there's 5 colors total. So we'll start right here at the bottom in row 1. We would knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches before we would actually switch. Now remember, when you're switching colors, you want to do a yarn under to prevent hazardous gaps. And then you would knit 1 green stitch, and then 5 stitches in white, and so on. Each square represents 1 stitch, and remember, intarsia can be as easy as you make it. It can be as simple as thick stripes, or as hard as a repeating motif. Now I'd like to show you a couple of projects I've done with intarsia. This is one of my first projects that I still have, and it's got stripes on it. And remember, stripes are still considered blocks of color. I hardly use it anymore because it's sort of old, but I still keep it anyway. And this is my first example of trying to knit from a chart. It's a flower, which I'll pass around. And I have another one, which is a leaf. Attached to the corner are the charts that I use to actually knit the patterns. This is my latest project. On this side are just rectangular blocks of color, which are very simple stripes. I didn't use a chart for these. But on this side is a repeating flower motif. Around the flowers are a motif frame, which means I had to use a yarn over to attach them to the flowers. I call it the dancing violets, and it took me all summer to knit. I put a backing on the back to cover the other side and to make it reversible. And now I'm going to show you my latest project. I made this 4-H clover specifically for this talk. And what's so special about it is that I made the chart myself. And I'm going to show you how I did that. So, the first thing I did was I drew my design. And since the leaves are just mirror images, I copied them and then did out the stem. Then I taped the design together and colored it. Yellow is my background color, and green and white are my main. And green and white are my design colors. I was supposed to have knit the H's in, but it didn't work because I added them in too soon. So I covered them using a yarn needle and some green yarn, and I just embroidered them in. And at the top, I put 2012 4-H, and I put my initials in the corner. Intarsia can be as hard or as easy as you make it. And you don't have to be a beginner to do Intarsia. All you need is knitting needles and some yarn. And just as I just said, you can make whatever you want with Intarsia. Whether it's racehorses or teddy bears, all you need is a chart and some graph paper. The possibilities for creativity with Intarsia are endless. And now I'll be happy to take your questions. My sources were Mastering Color Knitting by Melissa Leitman and Sasha Kagan's Ready, Set, Knit. I also got some information on Intarsia from Wikipedia and from YouTube. Now I'll be happy to take your questions. Yes?
In that first material that you made, is there a background color that would have?
The leaf or the...
Yeah, can you pull it out? The first thing that you made.
What's that? Oh.
The big long thing.
Underneath this.
Oh.
Underneath it.
Oh, this?
Does that have a background color?
The question is, does this have a background color? Well, the answer would be no, because stripes are still considered Intarsia, but since there isn't really any background color and more than 2 stripes are being switched, there isn't a background color in this one. Are there any more questions? Yes?
Have you taught any of your friends how to knit?
The question is, have I taught any of my friends how to knit? Well, the answer is I've taught 3 friends how to knit so far. And one of them is teaching other people. Are there any more questions? Yes.
What's the difference between Fair Isle and Intarsia? Do you know? I've only ever heard a pattern as Fair Isle.
The question is, what's the difference between Fair Isle and Intarsia? Well, Fair Isle uses stranding to connect repeating motifs. And most often they're sort of in a sort of stripe, and in Intarsia, they don't use stranding, and it's more like a block of color, like it's been stamped. Are there any more questions? Yes.
So how long have you been knitting for?
The question is, how long have I been knitting? Well, I started knitting when I was about 8 years old, and I remember clearly that the very next day, I started knitting with stripes. Are there any more questions? Yes?
Being a mom, I just wanted you to show the last thing that you forgot to show, the poncho.
Oh, right.
She was supposed to put that out, and she didn't.
I forgot. Okay, and I also have this poncho that I made for my sister with stripes on it. Remember, stripes are still considered Intarsia because they're blocks of color. And in this example, there is a background color, which is pink. And our second color is the strawberry lavender. Are there any more questions? If not, this concludes my talk.